Good evening. Welcome to the November 6th meeting. I will now call this Town of Sydney Regular Committee of the Whole meeting to order. I'm Councillor Sarah Duncan in the chair tonight. To my left, Councillors Novick, Councillor O'Keefe, and Councillor Rantoul. I said left. To my right, this is my right hand, Councillor Duck, Mayor McNeil-Smith, and Councillor Garnett. And I don't have any new items to add to the agenda, so I'll start with the territorial acknowledgement. I acknowledge that we are on the territory of those Salish people who have been stewards of this land for many generations. May we learn to live in a good way with good mind the way that they have. And I will look to the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
All in favor? That carries unanimously. I will go on to the public participation period. I see a lot of people in the chambers this evening who I'm guessing are going to want to speak to items that many of them have sent letters in for. So if you want to come up and speak and it's something that's already in one of your letters, feel free to do so. Just try to keep it succinct, and please tell us your name, your address, and what you're going to speak to on the agenda. So anyone who'd like to come forward, you may start coming forward now. You have 4 minutes. Yeah, absolutely. Just press the button and it'll turn on the red light at the microphone.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Dawson McClure and I'm an advocate for backyard chickens. We have been requesting this bylaw change for about 5 years. We have shown community support in a number of different ways. The most impactful, I thought, was when my mom and brothers got over 300 signatures in just 3 days, just from talking to people in our neighborhood. I know it takes a lot and is a big process to change something like a bylaw. I've been very patient and hopeful. I'm happy with the report given to City Council, which covered a lot of great points like food security, food waste reduction, social well-being, natural top-grade fertilizers, which will reduce pesticides to our soil and water systems. Pest control, as chickens eat a large assortment of bugs and invasive plants. Positive social benefits. It teaches us children that food is more than something on a shelf at a grocery store. From what I have read, the number one concern is that they make noise. But almost any animal makes noise. Every animal does. Dogs bark, wild birds crow or sing, cats meow or even scream when they're faced with another cat in the same territory. Most clucking is made once a day while laying eggs and is referred to as an egg song. It lasts only 1 to 8 minutes and is usually in the morning, which doesn't violate any noise bylaws. The second concern, and maybe most talked about, is the potential to attract pests. Raccoons and rats are most concerned here in Sydney. Do chickens attract pests? No, not if well cared for. This bylaw update needs to follow suit with all the other municipalities and allow residents the opportunity for sustainable food systems. Coops that are made from galvanized steel that wrap under and around will keep any rats and raccoons that might investigate at night away. Chickens need to be put away at sunset and kept safe overnight in these coops. Chickens are smarter than most people give them credit for. They can put themselves to bed when the sun goes down. Now, what about the smell? An uninformed person might automatically assume that chickens smell bad, but they don't at all. In fact, my dog smells worse than any healthy chicken I've met. We are asking to keep healthy birds that are well cared for, and healthy birds do not create any smell. Keeping any animal requires regular care and cleaning. Dogs, cats, guinea pigs, fish, they can all become smelly if not healthy. Managing compliance is something that I read and believe would be well regulated with permits or a licensing system, like Oak Bay. They have a link on their website that requires people to read before applying for a license. It says the rules for keeping healthy chickens. This could easily be recreated for Sydney's use. So what happens when you get chicks and one matures into a rooster? That's simple. There are 3 groups of chickens: layers, meat birds, and dual purpose. A person wanting a backyard hen would purchase a layer, or maybe even a dual purpose. Most of these breeds, you can tell hens from roosters at birth. If people accidentally get a rooster, a lot of hatcheries or farms will exchange it for a hen. I look forward to this bylaw change and potentially having some gardening buddies next summer. Chickens are fabulous at helping eat invasive bugs like grubs and slugs. They're also great at stirring soil in the spring before we plant seeds. I think that all concerns can be dealt with when bylaws are well written in our neighboring communities. I am looking forward to an opportunity of raising my own backyard hens. Food sustainability is important to me and my family, as well as living in a community that's open to change.
Thank you. Anyone else like to come forward to speak?
Hello, Sandra Pettinger, 2423 Malaview. I've sent in my letters. I just want to, voice my hurrah for this. I did have one question when I was reading through the recommendations from staff, and I know I'm way ahead of myself because you haven't even talked about it, but I just want to bring the point up. My property on Malaview is actually zoned RM5, but I am a single family home and don't intend to develop my property for the near future. So can I still be part of this because it's the R1, I think, is what was listed on there. So it's just a point I want to bring up with people, or bring up with you, just so that it's in the back of your mind when you're discussing this. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Greetings, Mayor and Council. My name is Haley Shannon, 2010 Frost Avenue. Thank you for considering allowing backyard chickens in Sydney. It's a topic that's very important to me. You've already heard from me in various letters over the years, so I'll try and keep this brief. I think your research department did a great job of outlining the benefits and challenges, so I wanted to briefly speak from a personal perspective. My family kept chickens all growing up. They were a normal part of our childhood. I always knew exactly what it looked like to care for the animals that provided us with our breakfast. As a very young child, I was responsible for feeding, letting the chickens out, collecting the eggs, caring for them. These simple tasks have instilled a genuine respect for animals, especially those that feed our community, and this experience has positively shaped and informed my adult life. I currently work in environmental sciences. I've held positions working and training with animals. I believe it's this kind of childhood that can foster a generation that cares for the environment and stewards the environment around them. We're living in a unique time in human history where we actually have never been so disconnected from the food that we eat. I believe raising backyard chickens is a really simple way to close that gap between ourselves and our food. It's also a way we can close the gap between farmers who raise most of our food and ourselves, and in this way we can grow together as a society that respects and understands the value of animals such as chickens. When I was 5 years old, we had a chicken. We named her Hickety Pickety. She was so friendly that she actually allowed us to place her in our swing set and push her back and forth, and this is what my childhood looked like. I am so excited that my children would grow up and get to make memories and experiences like this, even though we don't currently live on a farm and probably won't be able to live on a farm. So when making your decisions, please consider that small experiences like this make up the entire world for a child, and that entire world is actually what builds the next generation. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any further speakers?
My name is Crystal Russo. Thanks for hearing me. 2268 Gale Place. The report to committee that you have in front of you is an excellent summary of all the factors that you need to consider on this issue of backyard hens. So I won't repeat what's stated in the report, but I do have some things I want to highlight for your consideration. The first thing I noticed is that the majority of the people who have written to council are in favor of backyard chickens. There are also 158 signatures of support listed in that, and it sounds like more that maybe I didn't know about. That was mentioned earlier. I also noticed that there were a few opposed to the keeping of hens. Those opposed wrote about worries about noise, rodents, waste, and smell. I feel that these perceived challenges aren't substantial enough to justify a ban on backyard hens. If noise is such a nuisance to neighbors, perhaps we should consider banning children and pets from making any sounds in backyard spaces, so not to disrupt the peace. If rodents are a problem, we better ban the use of backyard bird feeders, outdoor waste collection, composting, backyard barbecues, and while we're at it, all outdoor dining. If the smell and waste is a problem, let's also insist that all dogs use indoor toilets instead of defecating in their backyards, and let's certainly stop applying compost to our gardens. I'm obviously making light here about these complaints, but the point I'm trying to make here is that when managed properly, backyard chickens aren't significantly worse contributors to noise, rodents, smell, or waste than the things I just listed. These other activities are effectively managed through the bylaws that we have currently in place. So why can't we do the same for chickens? I don't see how that's any different. I had the opportunity to grow up on a dairy farm and raise my own chickens as a child. And I recognize that the idea of backyard chickens can have a tendency to be romanticized. There are real issues that need consideration. Things like how to license, manage compliance, deal with accidental roosters, end of life, etc. These, however, are hurdles, not roadblocks to us moving forward. We also have the opportunity to lean on the many examples that we have from other municipalities in the CRD. Please consider updating the bylaw to permit backyard hens. The report also suggests 2 alternatives to updating the bylaw, the first being initiating a community engagement process, and secondly, that an amendment not be pursued at this time. It's been 10 years since council last considered amending this bylaw, and there's clear and active support for this change. If you decide today not to update the bylaw, move forward updating the bylaw, please at the very least do not consider the alternative number 2, which is to not pursue the amendment at this time, because there's clear and obvious support for this to move forward. Thanks.
Any further speakers?
Evening, Mayor and Council. Dana Jill and I live in Sydney. I'm speaking to this issue, obviously, and I wanted to say I was really impressed with the first speaker. Very bright intelligence and compelling arguments, and they were well set out. I think this is, there are a few things about this issue. I think we can manage many of the concerns that we have around smell and noise and those kinds of things. I'm concerned a little bit about the potential impact on rodent population, rats. I think we were the rat capital of BC at one point, so they're definitely around and they're there. So that's something we're going to have to manage. The main challenge in this process is going to be enforcement. When you've got competent, well-caring families who do the things properly, like these families appear to be, that's not a problem. But when you've got people who get into this business or this area thinking, wouldn't this be great? And they don't take care of their animals, they don't clean up, you have all sorts of problems of infestation, and enforcement then falls to the community and limited bylaw officers. We already know you're stretched. So the question is, how are you going to manage that process? So the potential down the road would be, if we go down this road, how can we make sure that we are trying to make sure that we've got the capacity to deal with this issue when things come up. I would think most of the people that are going to go into this area will probably do well to do that. The other thing is the issue, there are some concerns. I was looking at the University of Minnesota website today on chickens, and there are things that we need to be aware of in terms of salmonella and bird flu and the transmission to adults. And what is interesting, they said, make sure when you handle a chicken, go in and wash your hands. They were particularly talking about children. So the viruses can transfer between people. So we need to be conscious of that. I go to the Saanich Fair, and especially the chickens and the poultry, and the 4-H kids are fabulous, and they've got names here, and they know everything about them, and they're sitting there kissing and caressing their animals. It's something we need to be aware about. The other thing down the road is, while if we go down this road and we find after a number of months or years that the joy of chicken ownership becomes less rosy and people start trying to get rid of their birds and what they do with it. And the question there is, we know during COVID, a lot of people got pets, and then when COVID ended, they decided they couldn't afford them, or they just didn't want them, and so they dumped them on the institutions that look after that. So there's some things going down the road. I originally was going to say I'm not too in favor for this, but I guess what I'm saying now is might not be a bad idea, but we need to make sure that we've managed as best we can how to deal with complaints going forward. Thank you very much. And congratulations again for a fabulous presentation.
Thank you. Any further speakers?
Good evening. David Calverley, a resident of Sydney. I'm actually not talking about chickens. I read the council expense policy document and I didn't prepare notes. I thought I hate to say it, go at this cold chicken. But I just think when I read it, I remember in my business life that expenses were one of the biggest nightmares that I tackled as a CEO. It became a question of niggling, and every state had a different thing, and the Canadian government had a policy and whatever. What you have here is an absolutely wonderful written document. I think I trust my councillors to only do the right thing. And when I look at this, I wonder whether you couldn't build in a bit more flexibility. I just wonder, as you go through it, perhaps all of these minutiae about written receipts, specific written receipts, for example, for meals, as opposed to simply the credit card receipt for a meal. If you're going for a $20 meal, asking, if the restaurant doesn't give you an itemized receipt, they just give you a credit card receipt, maybe that's enough. Maybe some per diem idea could be thought of. I just wouldn't want you to spend a lot of time, and I do understand as public figures that you're monitored and looked at by people who just do that sort of stuff. But maybe a little more flexibility. I trust you, and I think most people in Sydney trust you. Maybe flexibility is a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Okay. Calling a second time. Calling a third time. I'll call this public participation period to a close. Thank you everyone who came up to speak. Okay, I will move on to the approval of the minutes from our last regular committee of the whole meeting. Are there any comments, edits? Okay. Seeing none,
Move the minutes be approved.
Second.
moved and seconded. I'll call the question. All in favor? Moving along, we have no presentations, no development applications. We'll go right on to the staff report for the backyard hens and move on to Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you, Chair. I should start off this by just saying that staff do appreciate the comments on the quality of the report. I should just mention that I'm only a contributing author, so most of the credit goes to Ms. Gilmar for this one. So the intent of this report is to bring forward information to Council about the implications of permitting backyard hens in Sydney through an update to the Animal License and Control Bylaw. So local governments have the authority to regulate the keeping of animals through Section 318 of the Local Government Act. The last time backyard chickens was explored in Sydney was in 2013. And at that time, the council of the day chose not to proceed with an amendment to the bylaw. Since that time, we have received the occasional letter regarding backyard chickens, typically in support, but not always. And in 2019, the town started receiving quite a few letters in support of backyard chickens in the run-up to the OCP process. And backyard chickens was a bit of a topic during the OCP process through a number of engagement forums. And again, both comments in favor and against the keeping of chickens in Sydney came out of that process. And following that, the completion of the OCPs, Council did direct staff to look into this further and bring forward more information. So that's what this staff report is all about. So in the last several months, staff have undertaken research to understand what some potential approaches to backyard chickens in Sydney might look like. And we should be clear that this does not include the keeping of roosters, or staff would not recommend the keeping of roosters. So this really is about backyard hens. So the report goes over some of the benefits to hen keeping. As has been mentioned at the meeting tonight, those can include local food security, social well-being, educational opportunities, food waste reduction, and some of the challenges of hen keeping as well, noise, pests, potential smells. Staff have also looked into what compliance would look like for this bylaw change if adopted, as well as things like chicks, the keeping of potentially other animals, and end-of-life considerations for when people no longer want to keep their hens. There's also the question of recent provincial changes to legislation that would change the use on potential single-family and other properties in Sydney. Staff have looked at that briefly as well, and as the report details, generally the approach is that hens would be best kept, in staff's opinion, on single detached properties in Sydney. And to answer Ms. Pettinger's question, we think there's still some more work to do looking at those properties that are zoned multifamily but are next to potentially other higher densities, zoned multifamily but have a single family use but are adjacent to maybe denser and more high intensity uses like multi-story buildings. So that's something that staff are still looking at. And again, the parameters that we brought forward in this staff report are not a draft bylaw for consideration at this stage. They're just some potential parameters for council to consider. So yeah, there are some potential hen keeping approaches in the staff report, and staff would welcome any feedback on those. And staff have also looked into some licensing approaches like in Saanich in the district of Oak Bay, and would be bringing something forward that would work for a Sydney-specific environment. And as the staff report also details, there has been a number of public submissions on this issue over the years, particularly in the last several years. And I think at this point, staff are feeling like, we've received a fairly wide range of comment from the community on this, both for and against. And I think we anticipate that if we do further community engagement, we're going to get largely the same type of responses. So at this point, staff are recommending that a draft bylaw be brought forward for consideration rather than going out to further public engagement. And finally, just a word on financial implications. So a bylaw amendment could be brought forward for a relatively low direct cost. However, as I think it has been acknowledged here tonight, there would be some potential bylaw enforcement costs over the long run. And so that's definitely something that staff feel the council should consider as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for staff? Yeah, Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the report and the comments. In regards to enforcement, is that CRD animal control that looks after enforcement on our behalf?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe, it's a bit of a combination. So any issues directly with the animals themselves would be dealt with through CRD animal control. Any issues with the coop, for example, and the siting of the coop, that would be dealt with through Sydney's bylaw enforcement.
Okay.
Yeah, so
because
it's sort of
that's a building kind of thing.
The living part of it and the structural part of it would be divided out.
So I'm anticipating that probably the complaints, if we had any, would revolve around maybe smell or people saying, hey, there's people next door who have chickens. And so that would, I would think, be rooted primarily to the CRD.
Yeah, those would be
Okay.
referred to the CRD.
Okay.
Yep.
And so if we add that to our bylaw, is there any additional enforcement costs for us, or we just add it to the list of things that the CRD is doing on our behalf already?
So the town's contract with CRD Animal Control provides for a certain number of enforcement hours.
Okay.
And so it really is a question of what those enforcement hours are used to do. And, you know, that would probably be a matter of priority in terms of what types of calls are coming in. And so potentially there could be other calls that are bumped.
Okay.
It's tough to tell, but yeah, we have a certain number of enforcement hours, and CRD Animal Control would try and fit that in.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. So costs would increase, why? If we decided we wanted them to make more calls than we're currently contracted with them, or?
Essentially, if we wanted the CRD to provide additional enforcement hours, we could change our contract and
Oh, okay.
get those additional hours, yeah.
Okay, so unless we did that, or there wouldn't be any significant additional costs then?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one more, if I may, in other jurisdictions, do they charge a fee up front, like for the cost of, getting a permit for, staff are gonna have to look at the coop, I guess, to see if it meets the requirements and the standard?
Yeah, so there are some municipalities that do that, and there's staff have gleaned some feedback from a range of municipalities on what sort of the sweet spot might be for that level of how onerous the application process needs to be. So that's something we'd consider when we bring the bylaw forward.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. And just one more, I think.
Go ahead.
So my understanding of if you came forward with the draft bylaw, and we didn't bother with a formal public engagement process, that people will still have the opportunity when the bylaw comes forward for review by council to come and provide their feedback through that process.
So on this type of bylaw, there's no public hearing required, so it would just be through the public participation period
Right.
at the council meetings where the bylaw is considered.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I saw Councillor Novak.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your report. It was very comprehensive. Like my colleague beside me, I have concerns about the long-term enforcement or management of this. And my question really relates to our ability to enforce those aspects of the bylaw that are going to fall to us. My understanding is that our bylaw enforcement officer is already pretty well committed, and this would be something entirely new and would add significant responsibilities. So my question simply is, do we have the ability with our current staff level to deal with this, or in your opinion, would we require additional staff?
Thank you for the question through the chair to Councillor Novick. I think, I'm not sure about the question about additional staff. I think in terms of the time dedicated by bylaw enforcement staff to deal with any issues would be partially down to because the town's bylaw enforcement staff would be dealing with call it the hard side of things, so the sighting of the coop and more tangible things like that rather than the animals themselves. The question is partially, I think, how the permit system works. So, is it one option is an honor system where we basically have a bylaw that says the coop needs to be sited in such a way, and we essentially, say get the applicant to acknowledge that that bylaw exists and that they'll follow it, but we don't necessarily do any upfront sort of permitting checks or things like that. Alternative, we could do a very comprehensive system up front where we go through a very rigorous process to ensure the siting of the coop is just where it should be. We do on-site inspections, things like that. I think in the latter case, where there's a very rigorous upfront process, you're going to have less bylaw enforcement issues, obviously. If there's an honor system, you might be on the higher side to bylaw enforcement. although, it's tough to tell. And our feedback from other municipalities is that the overall enforcement burden is not extremely high. The feedback we've received is that most people who keep chickens are interested in following the rules and want to do it the right way and want to, the best things for their birds. So overall, it's tough to say, but it partially depends on the type of bylaw we bring forward.
Thank you. One more question, if I might. In your table 1, you provide some parameters for chickens and coops and that sort of thing. One of them is the minimum lot size, and it's set at 550 square meters. Further down in your attachments, there are a number of references to other municipalities where minimum lot size can be anywhere from 500 to 1,000 square meters. One of my concerns about backyard chickens is based on lot size. I think if the lots are large enough, then it's becomes less of a problem. The smaller the lots become, the bigger the problem potential there is. So my question is, this 550 square meters that you've indicated, was this a studied number, or is this just sort of the first kick at the can? And would you look at that again in the cold, hard light of day and perhaps adjust that?
It was a bit of a studied number, I think, based on what we've seen in other municipalities. It's about a 6,000 square foot lot, so which is a sort of a standard single family lot. And the feedback we've received from other municipalities on that lot size is that generally there's very few issues based on issues related to the lot size. So I think we felt comfortable proposing that as a fairly solid option for council to consider.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I have Councillors Garnett, followed by Rintoul, and then Doug. So Councillor Garnett, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Didn't think you spotted me that quick. Thank you very much for the report, through you to staff. Mr. Newcomb, I thought it was well written, a lot of detailed information. I essentially have only one question because other questions have already been asked. And it's a concern that I have, and it's around recent stories in the news about avian flu and the increase of the particular strain of H5N1, and they're seeing spread to other animals, marine animals, and other skunks, foxes, and some birds of prey. From what they tell me, it is generally transmitted on wild birds, and given the proximity of some of these zones to our migratory bird sanctuaries, does staff see any potential concerns around that?
Through the chair to Councillor Garnett. I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer a question of that magnitude, but I guess I can offer that since 2022, the province has required registration of flocks. So I think the province is prepared in the case of any information coming toward them that there's an issue to act very quickly related to issues like bird flu. I also think it's, a bit of a question of the quality of the enclosure as well, and making sure that, wild birds and other creatures are kept out of the chicken coops. So that's, it's definitely a known issue, and I think the province is acting to address it through this system they have, and it's a mandatory system. So it's something, if council decided to go into this, we'd incorporate it into the system for sure.
If I may, just to follow up, so just so I understand for clarification, so you believe, or staff believes, there are ways we can mitigate the risks to our community, or potential risks, I should say?
I think staff are confident that the province takes this issue very seriously and is acting to the degree that they're possible to address it.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the community members who came out and for your long time advocacy. I think it's important that obviously not everyone in the community has this shared point of view, but I think it's been well articulated this evening in the staff report also, provides committee with a great deal of information, which I found to be very helpful. For sake of clarity through you, Chair, to staff, the permitted zones in Table 1, so referring to R1, for example, R2, the reference is that must be accessory to single detached dwelling. So as parameters may change in the zoning bylaw to R1, for example, initiated by the province or initiated by the municipality, do I understand correctly that this bylaw would still restrict the keeping of backyard chickens strictly to properties with single detached dwellings?
Through the chair to Councillor Rintoul, yes, that's the case. So I think staff's primary concern with anything other than single detached dwellings is a multiple ownership situation where, you know, like the town wouldn't issue, say, a permit to an owner on a multiple owner property where without sort of getting sign off from other owners as well, right? And the town being involved in that kind of multiple ownership situation, and whether there's consent or not, or it's withdrawn later, it could get very complicated very quickly. So I think staff's comfort level is solely around having a single ownership property, which basically is single detached dwellings.
Thank you, and I would share that same comfort level. So my appreciation to staff. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Duck, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff. Just wondering if there's an opportunity for this to be considered by the Advisory Planning Commission, given their strengths in this area, to give some feedback, maybe in development of the bylaw or maybe in consideration of further review.
Through the chair to Councillor Duck, the APC's mandate is certainly related to land use matters, so that would definitely be within council's prerogative to refer it, for sure.
Okay, thank you. I think that's something for us to consider in our deliberations.
Thank you. Any further comments? Nobody wants to speak for first time. We can take second time speakers if anyone had follow up. Nope. Okay. Oh, Councillor Duck, you had.
I will read the recommendation, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
The recommendation that, and I so move that staff bring forward a bylaw to amend animal license and control bylaw number 1965 to allow backyard hens in Sydney.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any further discussion? Councillor O'Toole, go ahead. Oh,
Yeah,
I'm
thank
sorry.
you.
It's
Pardon me.
the mover had further comments. Go ahead.
So
Sorry.
I'm wondering if in the process of developing this bylaw, if we can refer to APC or if we have to make an amendment to this motion to do that. But I think there's some valuable input that the Advisory Planning Commission can offer in developing this bylaw. And I'd like to hear what my colleagues have in considering that thought. Thank you.
Thank you. And the seconder wish to speak.
I have my concerns, thank you, Madam Chair. I have my concerns about backyard chickens for quite some time. However, I've spoken to quite a few people about this over the past few months, and I know a few people that have backyard chicken coops, although not in Sydney, obviously. And I'm satisfied that it is something we can move into, providing we have a regulatory system such as the one being proposed, and providing we have the ability to enforce the rules. And I must say that that aspect of things does give me some concern. However, I'm prepared to take, to give the benefit of the doubt to our staff, who I think will do a good job in ensuring that this doesn't get out of hand. So I think we should be in line with our neighboring municipalities, allow this under the fairly limited conditions that have been proposed. So I'm happy to support this in its present form. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Garnett and then Councillor Rintoul. Oh, Rintoul was first. My apologies. Councillor Rintoul, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll support this motion as it's before us. I was, concerned coming in around the the options here and the suggestion around community engagement, and to look to, revisit that process. And as we talked about the amount of advocacy that we've seen from residents, it reminds me that council recently has moved forward a process around reducing speed in Sydney from 50 kilometers on local roads to 30 kilometers on local roads, and that was based on feedback through the active transportation planning process that we'd seen from community members, and in fact, bringing this forward to a revised bylaw provides further opportunities for public engagement. And so I think I'd rather not see it further delayed based on the support that has come before committee this evening and on other occasions through our OCP development process. And I'm happy to support the motion. I don't think I'll speak to the suggestion on APC at this time because it's not in the motion that's before us, but I'm prepared to speak to that if it comes forward as a motion arising. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, to be completely honest, I'm a little torn. The young gentleman that spoke earlier articulated very well the arguments for the for allowing backyard hens in Sydney. But as the questions I asked of staff earlier, I do have concerns around avian flu, just because of what's happening and the fact that the BCCDC is actually monitoring the situation to make sure there is no spread to humans. There's been none in British Columbia yet, but they are. It's serious enough that they are monitoring it. There is a concern of some degree. I also have concern around the compliance aspect of it in terms of our lone bylaw officer, and adding, as Councillor Novak said, to his overburdening him. Short-term rental regulations will be coming down soon, which will also add to his workload. So I do have to take that into consideration when I make the decision. And also in terms of compliance, as has been spoken to earlier, I'm sure everyone in this room who's an advocate for backyard hens will be excellent owners and do an excellent job. But unfortunately, that's not going to be everybody. You're going to get the home I lived in not too long ago, there two houses down, even when it wasn't legal, people had backyard chickens and a rooster, 5:30 wake ups on weekends. So noise was a factor, but not for backyard hens. So I understand that. Although there was the attraction of raccoons and rats, because you knew when they were there, because the backyard hens would go nuts because they felt they were going to be attacked. So you did hear that in the middle of the night. That did happen on occasion. And as far as the rats, as I said, they were there. They definitely were there more when they had the chickens, because eventually somebody put in a complaint and the chickens went away. The odor I can attest to, not from my yard, but from my neighbor's yard. He actually called me over one day. They could not sit in their backyard in the summer when it was hot. The smell was that, hit the phrase foul, but it was very, very poor. So these are all things that factor into it. And I know there will be people that won't be responsible, but I would imagine the majority will. So having weighed all those things together, I'm just going to sit back and listen to the rest of council talk. I've taken in what's been said by the public and what's been said by other members of council, and ruminate that around in my head and come to a decision when time comes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm support of moving this ahead for a number of reasons. Good points brought up by the public that spoke about, and in the staff report, of the smell, the noise, the rodents. In terms of concerns about, pardon the pun, but a few bad eggs, spoiling it for others. We don't prohibit people having dogs because there's some bad owners that allow them to poop in the park and don't pick up after them, or that they bark when they shouldn't. So I don't think we should be basing our decision on the fact that no matter what we do, whether it's chickens, whether it's dogs, whether it's people speeding, there's always going to be people who don't obey the rules. And so I don't think we should stop something from moving forward because of those few bad eggs. In terms of enforcement, I agree that that's possibly an issue, but as I understand it from staff, our part of the enforcement wouldn't necessarily be on the chickens itself. That's going to be a CRD function, so there won't be cost to us. I think the key with any type of a bylaw that you have, or something like this, is you have to have a strong front-end process. So what I would be looking for from staff was, I like the idea of having very prescriptive guidelines in terms of, here's what your coop has got to be like, here's the materials, here's the size as they've outlined here. A one-time permit is required, an inspection to make sure that they've met those. And I think, and if there's a cost associated with that, then we find out whatever that cost is. And I think when you put those strict and specific measures in up front, that will discourage those people who think, this might be kind of fun, let's get a few chickens and throw them in the backyard. So I think having those measures in place would minimize the amount of time we have to spend on enforcement. In terms of sending it to the APC, I don't see that we would, I don't know what else we would get from that. This is something that has been kicking around for 10 years. We've heard multiple times from both sides of the issue, from the public. I think staff have done a well-researched report that I think covers off any potential issues and how we might address those. And as colleagues said, I don't see the need to delay this anymore. So I'm in forward to seeing this move forward the way it is. And as staff have said, in terms of public engagement, people will have the opportunity to weigh in if they want to make their views known during that process. So I'm happy to see it move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Mayor McNeil-Smith, you have not commented. Do you wish? No. Maybe I'll go to myself before second-time speakers. I've written down the comments that I felt hadn't been covered. So I think when this first came up, one of my concerns initially had been that based on lot sizes that were in our animal control bylaw, I believe, for aviculture, I was worried that there would be very few properties in Sydney that would actually even qualify because we have so many small lots. And what I had been worried about was that a lot of people would do a tremendous amount of advocacy and work to try and convince us to get chickens, and in the end, maybe only 24 lots would qualify. So I was really happy to see that there were approximately 2,300 properties, so maybe a quarter, 20%, depending on how many of those might be duplexes or multiple dwellings if they're, suites or something. But that's quite a lot of our properties that would still be eligible. So I felt satisfied that a number of the families who actually came forward and advocated for this would be applicable, and all their hopes wouldn't be kind of deflated. I share Councillor O'Keefe's feelings about there's always going to be somebody who abuses the commons, and that we kind of see that kind of same problem come up when we talk about parking and speed and rats and noise and the whole works already. And so I'm not terribly worried about that. I also think that just having people who have had to do this much research, because we are the only municipality that hasn't had them to date, means that the people in our town who are likely to do it are not going to be laissez-faire about it. They're not going to feel that this is this, kind of blasé right that they have. It's something very special that they just earned and that they probably did a lot of work for to advocate themselves. So that probably at first we're going to have a lot of responsible people who are very preventative towards that approach to the abuse of the commons, especially since this is probably the one issue we've had more children come forward for and speak for. So that means that, our next generation is going to be watching out for this and is going to know what it takes, and that kind of myths around what little attention these kind of birds might need, or that, it's easy. They're not going to be fooled by that, just like the other adults who came forward who'd had chickens before or grew up on farms, and they know that it's not just a walk in the park. They know exactly what's involved. That's really great. When it comes to the bylaw itself, right now our bylaws a lot of them are complaints-based, and I like that approach. I like that because it means that it's consequence-based. And so I'm not really in favor in having detailed inspections ahead of time. I do like the permit because we do permitting for dogs and having a permit, but But I don't necessarily in favor of doing an inspection, just because I know we do have people come forward to council who maybe have to get a variance because in the end, when they built the thing, it was off by a foot on a building that was maybe 20 feet by a back lot, and it didn't have a consequence. And so we have to go through a whole process to get them a variance for something that wasn't necessarily causing a problem. And so I would rather have people come forward only if this was a problem, that somebody who built a small thing in their backyard that was a few inches offline isn't going to have a bylaw inspector who has to come and do his job and check it off and tell these people that they did it wrong and they have to move it at some expense. But I would like the guidelines to be clear up front to ensure that people aren't confused, and if they do get a complaint, they're not, blindsided by it. And I would like that to be results-based as well, rather than explicit as to, a list of potential materials, but I don't want it to be so explicit and constrictive that it becomes setting people up for failure. Again, making it clear what we're asking for things to be done for what reason, so that people can make sure that they're complying and they're not likely to get the complaints. I'm torn on the ideas of, I've already covered that. Avian flu, it would be nice. It would be nice to hear from our environmental groups and perhaps when the permit's done, the bylaw is done, or perhaps we could reach out to them just for their comment on that. My understanding of how the zoonotic diseases kind of are fostered and spread is largely by the high concentration, bird and animal raising, and then diseases escaping and moving back and forth between populations that way. So I'm hoping that if we had more of a culture of lower concentration dispersed animals, that these diseases would be less likely to spread overall, and people would be healthier and more likely to fight them off, and the birds themselves would as well. So, but I know since we are not at that point already, that our environmental groups might have a concern at this time, and perhaps they'd be able to, I'm hoping that they wouldn't say no altogether, because I don't think that will solve the problem, but I'm hoping that they could give us some guidelines about how to reduce any problems if they do. Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone for their input. I won't be moving any further amendments to this, and would like to move to the question if we're prepared to. Thank you.
I believe we are. Oh, Councillor Novak, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have one more question for staff, if that's okay.
Yeah, a follow-up, go ahead.
Through you to staff. Because this bylaw would involve some kind of a semi-permanent construction on the lot, would the permitting process for backyard hens be applicable to renters as well as owners, or would it be restricted to property owners?
Through the chair to Councillor Novick, it would certainly be possible to open it up to rental households as well. I think in that case, the town would be looking for approval of the property owner as a condition of the permit. So that's something we'll definitely consider as we draft the bylaw.
Thank you. I think that's a critical piece that hasn't been mentioned before, but I just want to make sure it doesn't fall by the wayside. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novak, for rigging that. I will see if there's any further follow-up. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? That carries unanimous. We'll go on to 8B, the council expense policy, and would staff like to go forward with their report? Those people with families who came to see that, you may leave at this point if you would like to. You don't have to worry about disrupting us. Go ahead. We'll pause for a moment.
Just a heads up, there's somebody's coat there, someone's coat.
Oh. Oh, who'd imagine a child would leave their coat behind? those watching on video, we're just pausing for a moment as our jubilant children leave the council premises. All right.
Thank you,
I
Madam
think Mr.
Chair.
Newcomb, you may go ahead.
So members of council undertake their duties on behalf of the community for relatively little compensation. This policy is intended to reimburse council members for reasonable costs incurred on behalf of the town while undertaking council duties. The current council expense policy was adopted in early 2019 and has not been updated since that time. The reimbursement amounts for items such as meals have not kept up with the recent inflationary climate. The report covers 3 separate policy aspects that have been identified for attention and discussed in the staff report. Council is welcome to suggest any policy amendments they see fit, and these will be incorporated into a new draft policy which will be brought forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody have questions through to staff? Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm just my questions are more towards the process today in terms of how you would like the direction. So whether we're just through consensus or by motion to give staff direction on elements that we would like to change or see in the policy.
Thank you, Councillor. Perhaps we can tackle it according to the 3 areas that have been identified, and then perhaps open it up to additional amendments if we're all satisfied with that. So perhaps we can start with the meals aspect, and recognizing that the amount has not been changed for quite some time. What I would suggest is that there are 2 likely ways to move forward. One is to select a new level for the 3 meals and a total amount per day, and then add to that some inflationary factor. Or we could move right to the annual rates established by CRA, which would be updated automatically each year at about the same time that the mileage rate is updated.
Okay. Oh my goodness. Okay, Councillor Garnett, then followed by Councillor Novak. Councillor Rintoul, did you have your hand up as well, making a list? No. And Councillor Jack. Okay.
I actually have general questions not related to motion, so just based on the report.
Oh, we haven't made the motion yet, so if you have a question to staff based on the report,
Yeah,
you may
no,
do so.
it felt like Councillor Keefe wanted to get into the nitty-gritty, and I actually have some general questions if I could. Under the general portion, when it refers to discretion meetings and the second bullet under there, it mentions approval by the mayor. So I'm not clear in here, who approves the mayor? Is that fall under your responsibility?
Yes, it does.
Perfect. Okay, that's what I figured. Just want a clarification. And it also mentions increasing potentially the available budget for annual attendance at conferences and conventions. Do you happen to know approximately what the current available budget is for that?
It's a total of $20,000 for all conferences, and should council wish to see that increased pursuant to this discussion, then we would bring forward an incremental amount in the upcoming budget.
Great. I just have one last question. Under the council information, the current budget level is meant to accommodate 4 council members attending UBCM, 2 for AVICC, and 1 for FCM. I'm curious as to what the rationale, you may not know, I don't know how long this policy's been in place, what the rationale is for 4 members at UBCM, given the potential problems of quorum.
It's entirely up to council how many members you want to include in the budget, but typically when there are a number of councillors away, we would cancel a meeting for the week of UBCM typically.
But I mean, it could potentially discuss items on, anyways, fine for that. I'll leave it at that, because if you want to get into the specifics of it all, but from my perspective, I think that we could have less people going to that conference and maybe have extra money for other things, but that's for discussion later on. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Now I have Councillor Novak, and I did see Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to the meals that Mr. Hissick brought forward, I would like to move that we adopt the CRA rates for meals on an annual basis with a combined daily maximum provision.
You know, keep that in your pocket. We're going to continue with questions through to staff, just because I have Councillor Duck afterwards. And then when it comes time to make the motion, please.
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. My questions have been answered.
Okay. Would you like to make the motion and make the first?
Is that motion still on the floor?
It's not on the floor because nobody seconded it yet.
Okay, well,
but if you would like to, I guess since I'm in the chair, I have to decide how to do this, because I know there will probably be people who have further suggestions. So I'm going to let you make that motion, have that seconded, and then further additions that want to be made, we can discuss those, I think, as they come up, see whether they turn out being friendly amendments, because I think they're all kind of within the ambit of this policy, or whether we need to kind of take each of the recommendations people have.
Point of order, Chair?
Yeah.
I think the motions can proceed individually.
Individually? Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, in speaking to this, I think it's quite straightforward, and I think the report from staff is fairly clear. The point of adopting the CRA rules is, or rates rather, is that it has been studied by government. It's in use by many governments as well as non-governmental organizations. It's updated annually. It's very hard to argue with it from a perspective of fairness. It also eliminates the need for our staff to look at it on an ongoing basis. It's there. We don't have to think about it. We get an updated amount every year. I also think that the idea of a combined maximum is worthwhile. Some of us, when we're traveling, we tend to eat very little for lunch and then go out for a big dinner, or vice versa, as the case may be. And with prices in restaurants being what they are today, sometimes it's very difficult to have a full meal on the amount that's indicated for allowance. So I think having a little bit of flexibility within that single day maximum is valuable. It doesn't harm the municipality in that the allocated amounts are still at a maximum, and it does provide a little bit of flexibility for those traveling. That's pretty much.
Thank you. I'm just going to get you to restate your motion as you made it, so that staff can make sure that they got it down. And
thank you. I will. So the motion is that we adopt the CRA rates for daily meal allowances as amended from time to time, with the addition of daily combined maximums.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion on that motion as moved? Councillor Rintoul and then Councillor O'Keefe.
Point of order, should the seconder go first?
Oh, I'm sorry, the seconder.
Thank you, Chair. I support this motion, and I think it's important because it does align, we already are aligned with the CRA relative to mileage. This would just make it easier for staff to moderate and keep in line. I also appreciate the speaker and public presentation, and as noted by Councillor Novak, to have a daily maximum so that it can be easy to manage within the day, and the receipt thing doesn't become a problem as it has in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hissick, would you like to comment before I go to next?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The idea of maximums that was discussed in the report was if two meals are claimed and one is below the maximum and one is above, then you can combine those totals. It wasn't intended to say that if you only claim one meal in that day, it can be up to the total daily maximum. That's not the intent. I just hope Council understands that.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
If I might address the issue of receipts. So we are able to claim 100% GST rebate on expenses we incur, but only if with an itemized receipt, and that's why we require them. So one reason we need the receipt is to show the GST amount, and another is to prove that no ineligible expenditure such as alcohol was included.
Thank you very much for the clarification. I had Councillor O'Keefe, followed by Councillor Rintoul, and then Councillor Novak, you wish to?
So I was just, thank you. Through you to staff, I guess, it sounds like maybe we need some further clarity on what combined maximums means. The wording that I was going to propose, but maybe a bit long-winded, but do staff feel like they need further clarity? I guess I'm just worried. Okay. I'm just worried as long as somewhere when you bring it forward, the combined maximums will be clarified, as you said. Yeah, I've got something else in regards to, not providing reimbursement when there's a registration fee, but I think we can handle that separately. So I'm fine with the motion as it is.
All right, thank you. Councillor Rintoul, you wish to speak to this motion?
Thank you, Chair. No, it was more around clarity of the motion and similar to Councillor Keith's question, the reference to combined daily maximums. I'm making the assumption that is tied to the total of the 3 meals set out by the CRA maximums. So the combined total would be $106.10 per day. I'm making that assumption. I don't think the motion's completely clear on that, but if staff are comfortable that that's the intent and that's how it will be presented, I just want to ensure it's clear to all of us before the next stage in the process. Thank you.
Through the chair to Councillor Rintoul, yes, you'll have a chance to look at the policy wording when you see this come forward next, and if you're not happy with it, we can change it at that time, but I'm quite confident we can make it clear enough that everyone's on the same page.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Novak, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and this is just a question through you to staff. Mr. Hissick made it known that he wishes GST to be broken out because we can recover it. And so my question is, if that's the case, why are the limits inclusive of GST and not exclusive of GST?
That's a good question. Maybe we could make it exclusive.
It seems like that would only be fair.
Well, it does put a bit of an onus on the council member claiming to track how much of it is going to be reduced because of the GST. So that's probably why it was written with a basic maximum.
In the case of most restaurant meals, the GST is usually highlighted. If we should be fortunate, or as the case may be, unfortunate enough to have to go to a province where there's an HST, I assume that you'd have the same ability to offset that. And so if it's indicated on the bill, it would be pretty straightforward. So I don't think it would require too much math expertise. Thank you.
I guess, does staff need an explicit direction on that, or is that something you'll just explore when you're doing?
Heard loud and clear, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Garnett, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I won't support the motion. While I understand the ease of following the CRA maximums, I also see a 40% increase as quite large, given the context of the time we're in right now. And while I do see that these values from 5 years ago are probably a little on the low side, I think we could have increased them a more moderate amount. I'm just not comfortable with that big of a jump at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Any further discussion? Okay. Councillor Rintoul, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through to staff, last sentence in this section on meals reads, as reimbursement is not typically made for meals that are included in the registration fees paid on behalf of the claimant. What is the circumstances in which a claimant would be reimbursed for a meal that has already been included in registration fees?
I suppose in the case where dietary restrictions are not fully made as part of the registration.
And so that is an assessment that would be made when the expense claim is submitted, or because it's within the daily maximums, it wouldn't be evaluated?
The idea still is that the policy will be clear and will remind claimants prior to going to the conference what the rules are until it becomes second nature. So the idea is still that you provide your agenda that shows where meals are or are not included, and if they're part of the registration, then it seems logical not to reimburse. However, if council would like to do it different, I'm very open to that.
No, thank you. I'm, as long as it's addressed in here, and that it's vetted in some manner in those circumstances, when the policy comes forward, I will be content. Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe, you had a follow-up?
Actually, I had a similar comment to Councillor Rentoul in terms of, yeah, I would see something in the policy regarding there would be no reimbursement for meals when the meal is already provided unless there are health or dietary needs that can't be accommodated, is kind of what I would see. In terms of providing a copy of the agenda, you know, what I hope that we can do with this and other things, look at ways to reduce administrative burden and extra paperwork. And, you know, having to print off a copy of an agenda for, you know, a 5-day meeting, I think, I'm hoping that staff and the public would trust council if it's stated explicitly in the policy that you're not permitted to do this, that we wouldn't do it. And if we're found out, I guess we'll get a slap on the wrist. But I think there's got to be kind of a balance between, you know, the likelihood of non-compliance and the amount of administrative burden we want to add to things. So I would say, yeah, we're not going to do it. And whether we have to do a copy of the agenda, I think, I wouldn't think that would be necessary myself. Thanks.
Mayor McNeil-Smith, go ahead.
Copies of AVICC and UBCM agendas are published, so council members don't have to provide them with their expenses. I haven't in the past and wouldn't going forward.
Thank you. I would also note that a lot of the time, if we're going to a UBCM or ABIC and you're one of the councillors who is going, staff will have registered us for that, would have asked which days we were going for and whether we were going in person, if there is, you know, an online component or something. So staff would probably have a lot of this information before we went, so I'm not too concerned about that either. Seeing no more discussion on this portion of the motion, I will call the question. All in favor? Okay. All opposed? Councillor Garnett opposed. The motion carries. Would anyone like to make another motion regarding, I guess, the incidentals as we're going down each portion of the expense policy? Councillor Garnett, go ahead.
I'll move they be eliminated.
He moved that that incidental expenses such as coffee, tea, other things like that would be eliminated. Do I have a seconder? Okay, seeing no seconder, I would look for an alternate motion. Go ahead, Councillor O'Keefe.
On the topic of incidentals, I honestly can't think what we might come up with. You know, in the old days when traveling, you know, if you had to call home from Ottawa and incur long distance charges, you know, that was an incidental. Or fax, you need to fax something from the hotel business center to your office. But I mean, I can't even think of something. However, having said that, I would like there to be some provision for, in the event that there was some sort of incidental thing that came up, that was an exceptional circumstance. So I guess I'll make the motion that incidentals may be reimbursed in exceptional circumstances.
Point of order. There is a clause on incidentals already in the policy in Schedule A.
Okay. I just thought you were wanting to, some further clarity on that, and, okay. Okay, all right. I'll withdraw the motion then.
Councillor Duck, go ahead.
Yes, through you, Chair, a question to staff. Do we have incidentals? Is there a requirement for this? Because I support the idea that Councillor Garnett's put forward, but I'm not sure if we do cover anything right now, or if anything has been reimbursed for that in the recent past. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. They are very rare, they're few and far between. They're typically for coffee or drinks in between meals that aren't provided as part of the conference. You could always claim actual cost of parking along with mileage elsewhere. That's not really considered an incidental. I don't see a problem with leaving it in there, but as indicated in the report, I'd probably want to flesh out the examples just to give councillors more of an idea of what it's intended for. And whether you use it or not is up to you.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Councillor Mintoul?
Yeah, thank you, and I'll just speak to the current policy then with respect to incidentals. Look, this is a daily maximum currently of $15 per day. I agree the examples that are in here are perhaps somewhat dated. I know in my work life, under incidentals, we include gratuities. I mean, I show up in a hotel with a number of items, perhaps for the conference I'm attending. Having said that, you know, I'm working there and bringing, you know, banner stands and other items with me. It's not unusual to pay a gratuity, you know, for some service assistance of that nature. I think a lot of these policies include reference to gratuities. So I think that may be something that you may consider including, recognizing that you're not going to have that as something that can be documented, and also stating that $15 per day overall may be a little light if someone's eligible to charge something like a coffee under incidentals. So I'll leave my comments there on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further comments, it sounds to me like staff doesn't necessarily need further. Does staff request other examples?
I think I'm okay unless council wants to make a change in the amount, which I'm not really hearing from more than one at this point.
Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you. Knowing that I believe CRA also has a maximum for incidentals, could we just kind of tag that in and say incidentals would also be covered under the same policy?
That's a good idea, Councillor. I'll bring that back in the draft.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Novak, go ahead.
Thank you. Can I move on from incidentals with a question to staff?
I believe so. It doesn't sound like we need an additional motion regarding that, so go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Through you to staff. The question of the number of people going to particular conferences, I think you mentioned that it was sort of traditional or based on the total dollar amounts that were available to be used. Are those hard numbers, or are they flexible depending on the year and depending on where the conference might be? For example, this year conference is in Victoria, so there's virtually no accommodation to be had. Most people here in Sydney are going to come home after going to a day of sessions at AVIC in Victoria.
Thank you, Councillor. The last time it was in Victoria, we knew ahead of time, and it enabled us to send more attendees, knowing that the number of accommodations would be limited. So we could always keep that in mind, and we work towards the overall number. which, as I indicated before, if council wants to see an increase in that 20,000 annual budget, please direct me to bring an item forward with the upcoming budget.
Okay, thank you. I think this past year there were 4 of us at AVIC and 4 of us at UBCM, and it didn't seem to present any budgetary concerns or problems. So I was a bit surprised to see this. And again, I'm wondering, you know, my concern is that should one year 5 people decide they want to go, are there going to be restrictions? Is it going to be lots drawn, or I think these are important for council to be out and mixing with other like-minded elected officials and learning about what's going on in our communities. So I think they're important. Maybe not everybody sees that, and I just wouldn't like somebody to be denied access to one of these conferences simply because there's a number there, or we may or may not have hit a budget. So I'm struggling here trying to find a way to address this that doesn't prejudice either the municipality or the councillors.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Go ahead, Councillor. Or
If a member of council would like to see an increased budget brought forward, a motion to that effect would be in order. But without a council-approved budget, we have a limit to work towards, and it's at the mayor's discretion.
Thank you. And to clarify, the budget that we set for conferences, we did so at the time at budget approval. So that would be something to bring forward at that time, because I believe these numbers are based off what council previously set it for, based on those numbers. So, okay, thank you. The only thing I see left here that we haven't discussed that was a question for staff was under travel, subsection 3K of the policy, which is regarding, I'm sorry, peninsula-related travel. And the potential before us was to consider whether we wanted to strike 3K, limiting the mileage, changing the mileage rates outside the peninsula, or whether we wanted to leave that as it was. Councillor Duck, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to move the motion that we have the mileage reimbursement outside for any travel outside of the municipal boundaries for Sydney. A good example of this, if I get a second, or I'll second. Okay. A good example of this is currently if we go to a meeting at Central Saanich Fire Hall, there's no reimbursement for driving to and from there. Yet if we go across the street to Butterfly Gardens for a Destination Greater Victoria meeting, you are reimbursed. And this is literally across the street. So I'm just thinking that in the execution of our job, any travel we do outside the municipal boundaries should be reimbursable for travel by vehicle as it is for bus transportation. Thank you.
Okay. Turn to the seconder.
Yeah, I think
Just microphone.
I think that covers it. I have nothing to add.
Councillor Novak, go ahead.
I'll support that as well. It may not happen all that often, but I think when it does, it makes perfect sense. It's happened to me a number of times with trips for Chamber of Commerce or other events that are outside town of Sydney, but still 30 or 40 kilometers of driving to and fro. I don't see any reason why that shouldn't be reimbursed the way any other expenses are reimbursed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett.
Yeah, as much as I appreciate what's said, I won't support it. To me, any duties we do on the peninsula, whether it's the south or the north line of Keating, is still, I consider, part of my duties. So it's from my perspective, I don't think it's necessary. I think what exists is fine. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion on this one? Great. I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion? All opposed? Councillor Garnett opposed. The motion carries. Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Sure. I had something that I wanted to add in that's not included, and that relates to childcare expenses. And I would like to move that childcare expenses shall be reimbursed where overnight travel is required and where there is not another caregiver available in the family.
I'll second that.
Okay, I have that moved in second. Go ahead, Councillor O'Keefe, would you wish to motivate?
Yeah, no, I see this being a benefit for counselors who might have kids and maybe they want to go to AVICC or UBCM and, you know, getting paying for childcare for overnight is can be an issue. This was a standard thing when I worked in the federal government. Anytime I went out of town, if there was childcare expenses for overnight, those were covered. I think, you know, at the municipal level, we've talked about trying to be more inclusive and reduce barriers for parents who have kids. So, you know, this is not to cover necessarily the childcare that they would normally have during the day, but for that extra that's required in the evenings that they wouldn't otherwise have to pay.
Thank you. Seconder, do you wish to speak?
I think that this is simply moving into the 21st century with our policies. I think policies like this open the door to more people to run for council when they see that we are an equitable employer and that we give consideration to these sorts of things, whether they're single mothers or single fathers. I think that there's no reason on earth why somebody should feel that they can't, quote unquote, do the job because they have childcare concerns, especially when it involves being out of town. On those very few occasions, but they still happen when they must be out of town. So while I don't anticipate that this expense would be called upon all that often, I think it does show that we are moving into modern times. And I think it's important from the perspective of people looking at how council operates that we do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, this one I will support, and I'll just thank Councillor O'Keefe for bringing it forward. It removes a barrier for people who might want to run for this position in office. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul?
Thank you, Chair. Through staff, could we assume then that when this comes back as a draft amendment, that this would come with a maximum suggested in the policy per evening, or?
I'm going to need some time to research this because I've never actually come across this in a municipal council policy. So it might take some time to come up with some examples and some parameters to bring forward for council's consideration.
Thank you. I'd suggest that's one of the parameters that should be included. Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Yeah, just to that point, through you to staff. So the federal government, I'm not as familiar with the CRA directive, but I believe it's based on the broader federal government National Joint Council directive, which covers all federal employees. And I think my recollection is there's something in there on childcare, so that might be a place to look.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. Mr. Hissett, go
Can I
ahead.
clarify one aspect right at this moment? Would it be for voluntary travel or mandatory?
Well, I guess, you know, when I guess I struggle with that because you could say the mayor doesn't require any of us to go to AVICC or UBCM. So going to those conferences are not mandatory, but I think they're important. And, you know, that was the case when I was working as well. There was conferences or learning events where were of value and were of interest. They weren't necessarily mandatory, but they were important. So I would see UBCM and AVICC, as I said, that those would be eligible for childcare expenses, in my view. And I don't know how you classify, if you're classifying that as mandatory or discretional, or, yeah.
I'm gonna have to do some research on this one. It could delay how quickly this comes back, but it sounds like it's worthwhile.
Yeah, thank you for those further questions of clarification. I was going to ask the staff questions, but clearly you wouldn't be able to answer them either, because I was also going to ask about maximums and also how we would determine whether there was no family caregiver available. You know, sometimes if people, even if there's two parents, one of them might be working and out of town, that restricts the other one going, or maybe you do have a parent in town, but that parent is just like, I am not going to overnight your kids. So I'm interested to see what staff comes back with, best on, you know, best practices or other policies at other levels of government myself. Any more discussion on staff at least investigating that one? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that's unanimous. Were there any other additional items to go regarding this policy? Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
I guess I'm just looking for some discussion on this one to see if we might have some clarity. And I'm looking at the section on general at the bottom of page 2, and it talks about when a council member attends a meeting or event at their own discretion as a matter of personal interest. And I guess I'm looking for some clarity in terms of when I think of personal interest. As you know, there's lots of things I'm interested in, and any of the things that I attend, whether it's something with Urban Development Institute or something, several of us have gone to events with the Social Planning Council on housing. Those are not mandatory things, but they're directly related to what we do here and enables us to make better decisions. There's also, so there's things that are sort of regular meetings that we go to, like say the meetings we go to downtown for SIP. So are we calling those things of personal interest? Say if we go to chamber events, are those of personal interest? And I guess I'm just throwing it out there, and maybe to the mayor, who is the one to sort of approve these things, is where do we see the line there in terms of where would prior approval be required?
Go ahead.
Thank you, and through the chair. Where I would see the guideline is with regards to the some 40 council appointments that members of council have. So SIP is a council appointment.
Okay.
So it would be non-council appointments that council members feel attending a conference, workshop, presentation, they feel that it's beneficial to their duties.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
If I may actually just follow up on that. So something like maybe a UDI information session. So whoever has somebody has the CRD housing in their portfolio, would that follow for them, but not necessarily other councillors who went for interest, or would that still be considered outside the general interest because it's not strictly a SIP event for a SIP appointee?
Yeah, I would think unless the event was held in conjunction with the CRD and UDI. I mean, I think it's pretty easy to appreciate that UDI, given the housing organization they are, and given where housing is as a priority in our municipality, that's not going to be a concern or trying to draw a distinction whether it's considered part of your council appointment responsibilities.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks.
Okay. Seeing nothing further, I don't believe we need a motion. We have all the motions that we need regarding this policy. No, nothing further from staff. Okay. We have no other business. I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, but sounds like moved and seconded. I'll call the question. That was Councillor Duck moved, Councillor Novak second. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you.